begin the presentation in just a moment or two. We'll hold to allow a few more folks to log on. Thank you. Thank you for joining the Water and Planning Network's webinar for today, Maximizing Water Resources through Integrating a Multi-Benefit Approach into Land Use Planning. We have a number of great speakers today, so we look forward to the discussion. Ron, are you available to kick off?
I am here, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you're located, everyone. So glad you could join us today. I'm Ron Burke, CEO at the Alliance for Water Efficiency, and we're happy to be co-hosting today's webinar with the Water and Planning Network. Next slide, please. All right, here we go. So today's webinar will be 60 minutes. I think you all are familiar with the rules of these various online webinars, but just want to remind you that your phone line will be muted during the presentation to allow for recording of the webinar. We will entertain and certainly welcome your questions throughout the webinar. Please type those into the chat and we will address them at the end, and then we'll be sure to leave time to address your questions. If you could, if your question is for a specific speaker, please indicate that as well. Next slide, please. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Alliance for Water Efficiency, our mission is to promote an efficient and sustainable water future. We have over 530 organizational members throughout North America. We are a network of water efficiency and sustainability experts and practitioners. And AWE provides a forum for collaboration, research, developing tools, peer-to-peer learning and sharing, and so forth. And if your organization is not a member, I encourage you to consider becoming one. You can go to that link at the bottom of the slide. Next slide. All right, I believe I'm turning it over to Bill Susanek now. Bill, you there?
Thank you. Yes, I am. Bill Susanek here. I am the co-chair of the American Planning Association's Water and Planning Network, along with Marianne Dickinson, who is also the co-chair. The Water and Planning Network is an outgrowth of some initiatives that were started at the American Planning Association back in 2014. The leadership at APA wanted to engage more deeply on water planning issues and created a task force which turned into a working group, which evolved into what we now call the Water and Planning Network, which was created in 2018. It's a network of water and land use professionals. And while it is a quasi-division of the American Planning Association, we do not collect dues or have any requirements other than you email us at the email address shown on the slide and ask to become a member. There are about 500 or so members at present. We have monthly newsletters. We have webinars such as the one that will be occur following this brief intro. And we also have some social media that we're starting to get involved with. And we're looking for additional folks to engage with the Water and Planning Network in support roles. So if you have any interest, please let us know. With that, I will turn it over to Shannon Spurlock, who will be facilitating and is the host of today's webinar.
Great, thank you so much, Bill. Next. Great, well, I am thrilled today to be part of a panel and talk about the incorporation of multi-benefits into water planning and projects. My name's Shannon Spurlock, and I'm a senior researcher at the Pacific Institute. My role is focused on incorporating and elevating a multi-benefit approach, and I really am focused on the uptake of incorporating a multi-benefit approach and public policy. I'm going to start off by introducing some of the work we do at the Pacific Institute, and then after that, I will read the bios for each of our speakers, Kevin Reedy, Janet Clements, and Caroline Cook, as we come to their presentation. I'm excited about this presentation because each of our speakers presents a really important viewpoint about how multi-benefits can be elevated and incorporated and ultimately institutionalized, whether we look at the state level, economically, or through practice and integration with locally based partners. Next slide, please. Great. So starting us off, for those who are unfamiliar with the Pacific Institute, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan research think tank headquartered in Oakland, California, and we work nationally as well as globally. We have staff spread throughout the United States as well as abroad. Our 3 organizational priority areas include nature-based solutions, water reuse and efficiency, and water and climate equity. Next slide, please. The Pacific Institute was founded in 1987, and here we just a quick glimpse of our vision and mission, so you can just kind of see the principles that guide us in our day in, day out work. For the Pacific Institute, integrating a multi-benefit approach and framework is one way to elevate innovative water infrastructure and maximize the co-benefits of water planning and projects for the communities in which they are located. Additionally, when a multi-benefit approach is integrated into the framework of water programs, policy, and projects, what it really does is that it allows every dollar and every drop of water that is conserved or recycled, for example, to be stretched to its fullest potential to achieve that greatest return on investment. So next, please. To make sure we're all starting off on the same page, let's think about how we're going to define a multi-benefit approach and think about what makes it beneficial. If we consider, for example, stormwater capture and use, this element of water resource management is often undervalued, and the economic analysis of this resource may actually ignore the important co-benefits of stormwater capture and use. Through the Pacific Institute's research, we have been able to demonstrate that even when you plan and incorporate a few co-benefits, this dramatically improves the economic feasibility of stormwater capture projects. One aspect of incorporating a multi-benefit approach that I'm especially drawn to and I think is really important is that the framework inherently takes into consideration the needs of the community where the water project will ultimately be sited. So just as water applications or water treatment are inherently fit for purpose, the multi-benefit approach and incorporating that is inherently fit for purpose because it's that local community where these projects that are based that are really deciding what are the co-benefits that are important to them to attain. When we think about a multi-benefit approach, like many water projects and resource allocation, collaboration from across that spectrum is inherent to its success. When we think about how we move from idea to implementation, we also, with multi-benefits, think about the role of the grassroots, that community defining the co-benefits that are important to them and how they work with the grass tops, right? The decision makers at the community, regional, or state level that are ultimately the decision makers and charged with putting these changes into practice. Through our research and work, and actually the cover of this report is highlighting multiple years of research that resulted in the development of this framework. This came out in July or in 2020. We really demonstrated that you could look at the co-benefits and you think about how to quantify and value the co-benefits that stem from particular strategies. Their overarching themes could be broken down into these categories: water, energy, environment, people and community, and risk and resilience. These themes provide a starting point for identifying and organizing benefits and costs more methodically and transparently. Next, please. When we think about incorporating multiple benefits as well, we can also think about that big picture. So sometimes when we look at the costs of a water strategy or project, we might only be looking at capital costs or operations and management. But what does that cost actually look like when you integrate the co-benefits that stem from it, or even the avoided costs that are you're able to avoid because of the implementation of a specific strategy? So one thing to highlight here is that elevating a multi-benefit approach enables you to decrease that cost per acre foot, especially when you look at incorporating co-benefits. I think you'll hear more about this from each of our speakers, some of these big picture points I'm hitting, but I hope this will provide some seeds of thought for you as we move through this process. Another thing to think about with co-benefits is that often when we look at water projects, they span across departments. So it could be in partnership with housing or with transportation. And when we look at getting the greatest co-benefits out of a project, that may also enable us to maximize our opportunity for co-funding of these projects because they are in partnership with housing development efforts or transportation efforts. Next slide, please. So with this slide, this kind of goes back to that earlier piece where we identify benefits and trade-offs by determining the broad potential benefits and trade-offs of the water management options and engage the additional stakeholders that may benefit by the affected strategies, thinking of that local community and maybe even regional community again. When we wanted to understand where these benefits came from, why they matter to stakeholders, we conducted an extensive literature review. We had extensive input from advisory groups and focused interviews with experts and practitioners that identified more than 100 benefits and trade-offs. And again, we grouped them into these 5 things again. So we're looking at water, energy, environment, people and community, and risk and resilience. So these are a great starting point for identifying, 1, what the theme is, and 2, what the potential benefit is. And this can be a great starting point when you think about your water resources and considered projects. Next, please. And so this has been very much an overview of incorporating multiple benefits into water projects, programs, and policy. But these are some of the outcomes that you can think is very potential and highly likely when you do incorporate a multi-benefit approach. So thinking about how do you optimize your investment of time, money, and resources. I briefly touched on the co-funding opportunities and sharing costs. and even thinking about increasing equitable investments and in mitigating adverse impacts, thinking about that local community-based aspect as well. One more element I'll highlight in that co-funding piece before we move forward, and not so much co-funding, but when we look at funding opportunities from across the spectrum, nationally as well as at the state level, we do see that more and more are asking for the applicants to demonstrate a multi-benefit outcome. And we'll hear more about that today as well. So with that, I am going to conclude my presentation here. And what I want to do is I'm going to introduce you to Kevin Reedy, who is next, please. Sorry, go to that. So next, please. We'll head off to Kevin Reedy next. And he is going to share with us part of his role with the state of Colorado. I will read you his biography first, a short bio, and give you an idea of his background. So Kevin Reedy is the State Water Efficiency Specialist at the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and he has worked in this position since 2009. He provides technical and financial assistance to water providers across Colorado for water efficiency, planning, and implementation. He assists local governments on land use and water efficiency irrigation, and works on long-range statewide water supply and demand forecasting, and develops statewide water efficiency policy through research and projects. He was the lead author for the water conservation, water reuse, and land use sections of the first Colorado Water Plan, and is continuing in that role with the Colorado Water Plan. And that update is due in 2022. He'll talk a little more about your opportunity to weigh in on that process. Prior to joining the Colorado Water Conservation Board, Kevin worked with Aurora Water for 7 years as the Water Conservation Supervisor, overseeing all aspects of the Water Conservation Division. Kevin earned his Bachelor of Science from Colorado State University and his Master of Science degree in Forest Ecology and Management from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He has also served in the Peace Corps in Honduras, Central America, working in Pico Bonito National Park. So with that, I am excited to hand it off to Kevin and let you hear his presentation on incorporating a multi-benefit approach. Kevin?
Great, thanks, Shannon. Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon. Great to be here, thanks for attending. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about kind of a higher level, state level kind of perspective. And it's going to be couched in the water plan that you've got the slide up there. We've got our, we're actually out for public comment. I've got a slide on that later on, but this will be finished up, wrapped up at the end of this year, beginning of 2023, probably early January. So, this plan is kind of our state strategy document that helps us kind of figure out where we want to push our initiatives and put our money where they want to put our money there. So next slide, please. So a little bit about the Colorado Water Conservation Board. We basically, we're the policy and planning agency for the state of Colorado, mostly with water quantity, but we get into some water quality where it intersects watershed health, water reuse, things like that, and flood. And so there's a lot of other agencies that work on these things, and you know, we don't build projects, not like other states maybe where the state builds state water projects, but we basically collaborate with everybody, and we're a non-regulatory agency. So it's kind of a trick to do what we do without having a really strong regulation. Specifically, that third bullet down there, provide technical and financial assistance. It's basically mainly what I do: water efficiency planning and implementation, water efficiency and land use planning, drought mitigation planning and implementation, water reuse projects and policies. So, and you can see our mission over there. We were founded in 1937, so we've been around for a little while. And conservation kind of meant something very different back then than it does today. And so what we do is, we have to collaborate a lot with folks to do these multi-benefit projects. And it really helps us push our, water policies that we want to get in our water plan. It's a smart way to spend your money. You're getting more than one outcome out of this. And the outcomes slide that Shannon just showed is right, spot on, is how we look at things. And you know, it really creates a broader buy-in when you have a multi-objective, multi-benefits collaborative approach. It creates much more buy-in, much more diversity in projects to advance policies that are going to help a lot more people. So it's really, you know, much more cost-effective than what we used to do. All of us used to do a while back, where we would, you know, have a singular project and a singular focus. Next slide, please. So these four kind of icons and titles here, these are the 4 action areas of our water plan right now. And I am squarely, mostly in the vibrant communities one up there, up in the corner. You know, we're looking at municipalities and utilities and industry, cities and towns, counties, urban and rural communities, and wherever people live. That's kind of the idea. But then you've also got thriving watersheds, robust agriculture, and resilient planning. And I'll be speaking about those a little bit more. And these aren't distinct silos at all. These really, a lot of these areas cross over quite a lot, actually. And you know, it helps us do multi-benefit projects like we're going to speak to today. Next slide. So I want to show just a little bit about connections between these things and kind of start going towards this idea of collaboration, connection, and multi-benefits. And so, you know, when you work in the vibrant community space, you know, in the past, it was always like, hey, you know, water's water, land use is land use, urban's urban, and, you know, we're not dealing with, you know, too much of anything else. We're just going to try to save some water. And it's much further along than it used to be now in that. But, you know, it really shows this interplay between these different areas, action areas. And, you know, it definitely creates opportunities, but also helps you avoid, you know, it mitigates risk and negative effects, a lot of these things. So you can read that, but, you know, one thing is, you know, what we do in the city here has a really big impact on ag lands outside of the city, and especially, you know, senior agricultural water supplies. You know, the way growth happens here in Colorado and on the Front Range is that either a city is going to buy up senior ag water supplies or build out onto those prime ag lands. And so, you know, what we do here really has an impact on agriculture and vice versa. Same with thriving watersheds. You know, we can do these things. We can preserve and enhance stream corridors. And then, you know, those kind of things, those benefits come to the city. We've got, you know, South Platte River comes right through the city of Denver, a big river, and maybe not for other people's standards, but for us, it's pretty good size. And you know, it can provide, you know, environmental and rec opportunities here in the city. You know, provide attractive landscapes and shade, water quality benefits, all those things. And then the same goes for resilient planning. You know, we've had some really serious floods in the past here. In 2003 was a big one. It destroyed a lot of property, and so some of this resilient planning can help, you know, reduce this flood risk, improve habitat and green spaces, right? And so if we're living along rivers, you know, we can kind of combine these ideas together, and I can get a lot of mileage maybe from the water efficiency and land use side, and also, you know, for reducing flood risk and improving habitat can happen at the same time as well. So there's a lot of connections there. Next slide, please. Okay, so a little bit more about vibrant communities, just kind of a general idea here, but you know, it's really, I mentioned before, the nexus between the agriculture, watersheds, and resilient planning aspects of this. But you know, we've got this, you know, our water plan right now, and the first one in 2015, we were able to you know, slip in land use planning in there, and it was kind of a touch and go. It was a little bit more controversial back then to get it into a state water plan because we, you know, we're a very local control state. But you know, when we, you know, this plan recognizes urban population growth and, you know, water smart land use planning, you know, efficiency, direct potable reuse, and really what we're trying to do is reduce this overall water usage because we've got a lot more people living here than we did, you know, 20 years ago, and we are seeing volumes per capita way lower than it was before, and also, you know, volumes that are equivalent to around the, you know, the volumes of usage equivalent to the 1980s, 1970s in some places. But really what the crux of this is, the plan, you know, does support a range of multi-beneficial projects. And we've got a whole full grant program behind this where we fund projects to do this. And it all ties back into the water plan. So you've got this policy document setting things out. We've got a funding source that helps us implement it, and it comes back around and learns from each other. Basically, it's an iterative process. So we've got projects in water storage, water conservation, water land use, ag efficiency, water education, watershed health, outdoor recreation, water reuse, you name it. We've got a lot of projects going on that are funded through our grant program. Next slide, please. And so, we kind of come to this, and we're kind of all of us are kind of approaching this from a little different angle, I think. But one of the areas that I'm more involved with now is really water planning. And I think that's a really important way to look at this stuff. Maybe it's integrated resource planning. There's different ways you could approach this. But really looking at this more of a holistic water management kind of thing, where we're trying to balance the supplies and needs for people, yet with the needs of the environment and healthy urban landscapes, and also drought response. We've got we are in a continual drought, and so how do you do this without doing this in a holistic manner? I don't think it's really possible. I don't think what we did 20 years ago wouldn't even come close to be working now. Maybe that's why we're in the issues we have right now. And we need resilient water supplies, water conscious and attractive urban landscapes, planning that integrates land use and water solutions, and also the capacity and the stewardship level of our citizens and our folks that live here in the state. We want to get away from having people as water customers and go towards having people as being water stewards, right? That's the transformation we want to make. And also it does not, it helps the economy as well. If we're doing this, we don't have as many shocks maybe. If we have a severe drought and it knocks out all the landscape that was not sustainable during that drought, that's a big hit, and it has a lot of knock-on effects. So really what we're looking at is, though, one water ethic is really necessary to create this transformative change you want to see here. Next slide, please. So now kind of stepping back a little bit, we've got these planning scenarios, right? So this is kind of what our underpinning, we do a technical update in between water plans, basically to update numbers and do all the technical work. And the underpinning of the water plan are these scenarios. We've got 5 different scenarios ranging from status quo to, really, increased climate change with heat and really strong growth, and everything in between. And then you've got down, I don't know if you can see that very well, but you've got things like M&I needs, agricultural needs, social values, climate status, and water supply going up, those little squares going up there where those little icons are. And then within those, there's a ton of different drivers. And I'll get into one that's kind of more relevant for today. Next slide. So we've got a driver around urban land use and urban growth patterns. And so, you can read that. It's really kind of considering, what kind of density are we talking about with new development, and urbanization of undeveloped ag lands, like I was talking about before. And of course, there's a direct connection between housing density in cities and the impact on how water is used. It really has to do with a lot with the outdoor landscape. And so, these growth patterns, it does affect water resources. There's an impact on that. Whether it's you're growing out into undeveloped land and you're creating, water quality issues in a watershed, and different runoff kind of regimes, or you're growing out into ag lands or taking water off of ag lands, and it results in a shift of water use from that sector. There's a really good cautionary tale from the city of Aurora from the 1980s, where they took water rights off of farms down in Crowley County, which is, kind of almost directly, I guess, directly south, a couple hundred miles down on the Arkansas River, from Aurora. And what they did was, though, they bought the water rights, but they didn't build a pipeline, but they transferred it way up in the mountains, where the Arkansas starts at the headwaters, and they dropped it into the South Platte River, which comes right through Denver, and they were able to bring it to Aurora. Well, that was, a long time ago, 1980s. They weren't thinking of these multi-benefit approaches at all. And what they did was they dried up the ag land, took the water off completely. You got water quality issues, you had river impacts, you had noxious weeds coming in that were not managed, and you had an economy that pretty much collapsed. So that's something that we've got to kind of keep an eye on, obviously, right? We can't be doing it. We won't do that anymore. And it's really looking at these, kind of expanding your mind beyond your sole focus, and getting those multi-benefits incorporated into what you're doing and seeing what the negative impacts are as you're going along. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so I've got a couple more slides here, and these are kind of some specifics that come out of the plan. And those numbers up there, 1.1, and the next one will be 1.6. But those are just, the actions that are in the plan themselves. So this is 1.1 of our agency actions that we've got going on. And so the idea is to define and benchmark institutionalized water resilience, resilient communities, developing a framework that includes target metrics and definitions of what this means. Developing a framework and, creating a kind of solutions. We're trying to, look at how do we future-proof communities going forward, and how do we harness this new development and make it much better than it has been. We've got a lot of suburban sprawl here. It's not the best, and so we're trying to look at that, new directions. And I would say that, again, Aurora comes up. The city of Aurora is passing a new landscape ordinance that is really a really great one. They're taking out all their tree lawns and medians, no grass, no new cool season golf courses, cool season grass golf courses. You could try, I guess, with a warm season, but it's probably not going to work. And so they're banning basically golf courses as well, new golf courses. And so those are the kind of things that we're looking at to look at this. And in a couple of project examples that we've helped fund over the last couple of years, the Sonoran Institute has been another great partner. Like I said, we couldn't do any of this without partnerships and collaboration. We are an agency of under 50 people for statewide water policy, right? And so we've got funding, and we don't have a regulatory authority. So how do we do it? We bring folks in to say, hey, what do you want to work on? Can we do X, Y, and Z? Can you do this? And so Sonoran Institute has been a great project collaborator, and really, created some really great curriculum and projects coming out of this thing. And one of those is the Colorado Growing Water Smart program. And this project example on the page here is specifically around metrics about the integration of land use and water planning. And it's a progress and impact kind of metrics thing. And they're testing it right now in Fort Collins, I think, to see what it looks like in a real life situation and see if this will help kind of do this. And so the framework in those two bullets above will be most likely building off of something like this. But it's really good data and good project information to get to figure out where we're at, basically. And another one, which is really interesting, is the Colorado State University. It's One Water Solutions Institute, and it's looking at demand forecasting using landscape forms and zoning, basically, and a number of other things. I can put the URL maybe in the chat at some point, or we can send it out to you guys. But it's part of an integrated urban water model that they've built, and they're really looking at land use designations, lot sizes, census data, climate information, soil characteristics, and instead of projecting demand through GPCD, they're looking at it through those things, and then kind of comparing it and seeing how that works. So these are, just a couple ideas or a couple projects that we've kind of helped fund and they're kind of pushing the needle here, Colorado. Next slide. And then another aspect. Oh, sorry, Shannon. What? Yes.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll wrap this slide up, and then we'll move on to the economics piece.
That sounds good. So promoting outdoor one water strategies for integrated land use planning. So really looking at how this fits in into a landscape or land use planning, and it's a really good fit. It makes a lot of sense. If you're using one water principles, and it's the land use and integration of water make a lot of sense, right? And so really what this comes down to is climate resiliency, because we're going to be having climate extremes, climate shocks, and how we future-proof our communities is I think this is one of the ways we can do that. Just some project examples that we've been working on, the Denver One Water Plan. It's a framework that City and County of Denver Water, Mile High Flood District, Metro Wastewater, myself, and the Greenway Foundation, an environmental river group here in Denver, have all worked on, created a framework, and we've got this One Water Leaders group that we're now still meeting and implementing stuff on this. So more to come on that. It's pretty a neat project. Again, Colorado Growing Water Smart. The workshops. These workshops, we bring together land use and water planners and elected officials into the same room for about 2.5 to 3 days to hammer out an action plan. And right there, you've got a multi-benefit approach. You're coming from 3 different perspectives immediately, and they come up with some really interesting ideas. And then finally, the Colorado Water and Land Use Planning Alliance. This is a voluntary group that we formed, CWCB and the Department of Local Affairs, at another state agency that works with local governments and land use planning. We've come together with academics, land use planners, water planners, other folks from other state agencies, non-governmental organizations, and we meet quarterly and kind of talk about what everybody's working on. And there's been some really good collaborations coming out of that. So it's a kind of very multi-pronged approach, but that's great because that's what we're after with the multi-benefit approach. And I think with that, I am done.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. And we're going to hold any questions till the end. And with that, I'm just going to hand it off directly to Janet Clements, President and Lead Economist at One Water Econ. And I'll let her give a quick introduction of herself and take it from there. Thank you so much, Janet.
Hi, thanks, Shannon. Next slide, please. Next slide. Keep going. There we go. Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Janet Clements and I am a water resource economist located in Colorado. As the resident economist on the webinar today, I am going to talk a little bit about how to kind of an accounting approach for multi-benefit projects and kind of making that business case, moving from kind of a financial perspective to a more economic triple bottom line approach. So my first slide here, this term is probably familiar to many of you. Triple bottom line analysis is something we hear, I think, often in the water sector. From my perspective as an economist, it might mean different things to different people, but as an economist, to me, it's really just a comprehensive benefit cost analysis. A sound benefit cost analysis is one that takes into account kind of the full range of benefits associated with a project or program, including financial benefits, social benefits, and environmental benefits and costs. And thinking about not just, what's the cost and benefits today, but how do those change or accrue over time, and to whom they accrue, right? Who's benefiting and who costs. So this is kind of the framework that I'll discuss in terms of thinking about how to analyze multi-benefit projects. Next slide. So I am going to, my next several slides kind of just go through an example of applying kind of a triple bottom line approach to green stormwater infrastructure. And I'm sure all of you know or are familiar with what green stormwater infrastructure is. But just as a framing slide, I've kind of slapped EPA's definition up here. I'm really talking about distributed infrastructure, often nature-based infrastructure that manages stormwater or is intended to manage stormwater near the location where it falls. Things like permeable pavement, green roofs, rain gardens, etc. Next slide. So traditionally, when we think, especially in the water sector, when we think, I think especially about water and wastewater, which is kind of a service, kind of a pay for service in many cases. Utilities, municipalities have traditionally looked at cost versus revenues, right? That's kind of a traditional financial approach to analyzing or thinking about water resource management decisions. With stormwater and green infrastructure, it's a bit different, and sometimes water and wastewater as well. When we're comparing alternatives, the traditional kind of financial approach is to look at cost effectiveness, right? That's kind of the single benefit approach in a simplified kind of explanation. But in stormwater, we might think about the cost per pound of pollutant removed or the cost dollar per impervious acre managed. With green infrastructure, there's some challenges that presents, or that traditional financial lens presents, in that green infrastructure is not always or as cost effective as, you know, some traditional kind of gray infrastructure solutions. In the past, and I think this is changing, it hasn't always been as trusted of a source of or method, I'm sorry, to, you know, especially if you're thinking about I need to comply with certain water quality regulations. It hasn't been implemented at that scale to really prove that in some communities. Caroline's probably laughing because in the past, and she'll, I think, touch on this in her presentation, practices like, you know, rain gardens and things that are distributed across a landscape, in the past, you know, sometimes they're located on private property. They've been a little harder to finance or to count as an asset in a utilities kind of financial ledger. And again, that's changing, and I think Caroline will touch on that a bit in the next presentation. Next slide. So, you know, if you're thinking about a financial lens, green infrastructure doesn't always pencil out. But when we take kind of a broader economic, or what I define as a triple bottom line perspective, we start to see that green infrastructure solutions can provide, you know, an overall greater benefit to the community. So what you're seeing on your screen here is just a kind of list of the different benefits that green infrastructure projects can provide if they're designed to do so, organized kind of into that triple bottom line framework. So we have social benefits that accrue to the broader community. We have financial benefits that accrue to, in the form of cost savings to a utility or municipality or other implementer of green infrastructure. And then we have environmental benefits, going beyond just water quality, which is often a key objective of implementing green infrastructure, but also obtaining things like air quality improvements or habitat or ecosystem improvements with some projects. Next slide. So we know inherently, and Shannon and Kevin talked about this, you know, those benefits have value, right? So how do we account for those, and why is it important in many cases to be able to quantify and even monetize those benefits? You know, as an economist, you know, from my perspective, being able to monetize these benefits can just allows you really to compare on an apples to apples basis cost to benefits, rather than having kind of a checklist of benefits or a 1 to 5 ranking. With that information, you know, as I alluded in my last slide, you know, that's going to help you identify alternatives that really provide the most value to your community. But as the other speakers have alluded to, it can also open up a lot of other opportunities in terms of co-funding or competing for scarce funding. It can be used to support alternative project delivery models. We've heard a lot recently in the stormwater sector about community-based public-private partnerships, as well as you know, private property incentive programs, and that brings different people to the table and can help increase adoption. One of the things that I think is interesting is that I've worked with utilities in the past. One of the reasons that they are interested in having kind of monetized and quantified information on co-benefits of green infrastructure is be able to provide that information internally to their peer engineers who kind of respond better to that type of information rather than, you know, like I said, that 1 to 5 ranking. And then finally, it can provide a good platform just to speak and communicate about benefits and gain community support and buy-in. Next slide. So how do we monetize benefits? What you're looking at on the screen here is a snapshot from a tool that my colleagues and I developed last year for the Water Research Foundation. And the intent was to help, what the tool does is help practitioners, like probably many of you, to quantify and monetize the benefits or the multiple benefits of green infrastructure alternatives. And on the left-hand side, you see the list of benefits included in the tool. And at the top, if you follow across the right, you see the different valuation methods that were used to assign values to these different benefits, or are used in the tool. You know, as economists, we typically think of benefits in 2 ways, kind of market-based benefits or valuing benefits in 2 ways. One is kind of based on market price, and then the other is what we call non-market benefits. And those are benefits that, you know, you can't go out and purchase. You don't typically go out and buy a unit of water quality at a store, but we know there's a value to that, right? So we apply different kind of standard economic valuation techniques to assign a monetary value to these different benefits. There's 2 kind of primary, what we call original valuation methods. One's called stated preference and one's called revealed preference. With stated preference, we go out essentially and ask people what they'd be willing to pay for a certain benefit or for a certain attribute. For example, would you be willing to pay more on your water bill for a project that creates green jobs compared to one that doesn't? Revealed preference studies kind of look at data on consumer choices and try to isolate the extra amount that they're willing to pay for a certain attribute. For example, a home that has green infrastructure-based landscaping. And we can kind of isolate that value associated with it. We often look at avoided costs, comparing what would happen if you didn't implement the project and what are you avoiding. And then finally, we often look at, original economic studies are not super cost effective necessarily or easy to implement. So we often use benefit transfer. And that means, we go out and look at other studies that have quantified the value of these different benefits and apply it to our study site. Next slide. So this is a good example of a multi-benefit project implemented by Seattle Public Utilities. And we ran this project through the tool that I mentioned on the previous slide. But this is a great example of, if you look on the right, it's a map of Longfellow Creek watershed. The blue line is the creek and the orange lines are the where the projects or the green infrastructure projects were proposed. Seattle Public Utilities does a great job of engaging the community and really identifying their needs and what they would like to see in terms of a stormwater management project. And in this particular project, the community identified a need for better pedestrian improvement and mobility along the streets where that orange line is, as well as the need to revitalize a pocket parking area that had kind of become abandoned and somewhat of an eyesore and a danger to local residents. So Seattle Public Utilities took that and incorporated those benefits into the project. And you can see kind of that's a rendering in the middle of your screen of the park that they developed. And they were able to leverage funding, City of Seattle funding, that goes towards art projects in public spaces to put towards that park. So a good example of co-funding. And on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the different benefits associated with the project that we ran through our tool. And you can see that the categories of recreation, water quality, and property values, which are intended to kind of reflect the increased or enhanced aesthetics of the area, are significant benefits in this case. And I will say that in this particular case, you add up the benefits and it's a benefit cost ratio of greater than 1, but that's not always the case. And that doesn't necessarily mean that a project isn't worth doing. In many cases, if you're comparing two projects, a more gray-based approach, gray infrastructure-based approach to a more green approach, we did this actually in DC, and they're achieving the same water quality objective, but the green approach, we were able to quantify benefits. I think benefit cost ratio was more around 0.5. But that really just reflected the fact that that alternative had kind of 50% greater benefits than the other alternative. Next slide. Just the last kind of note on benefits is that my colleagues and I have done a lot of work on incentive programs for green infrastructure. And we always hear, I think this is just kind of an interesting anecdote on how to get people to increase adoption of green infrastructure through these programs. We've heard both from developers and residential property owners that benefits really resonate more with them. From developers, we hear, if green infrastructure will increase our bottom line because it's cheaper, or we can rent our apartments for more because we have a green roof, then we'll do it. But we just need to know what those benefits are, and we need kind of case studies, peer testimonials from actual projects to demonstrate that this is actually true. And so I just think that I'll close on that just with an anecdote on the role that benefits can play, or multiple benefits can play, in increasing adoption of these nature-based solutions. Next slide. That's it for me, so I'll pass it back to Shannon. Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks so much, Janet. We're going to hand this off to Caroline Cook now. And there's so much great information. We're just running a little bit behind, and just wanting to let our attendees know that we will be staying on a little bit later to answer questions. So if you're able to stick with us a little bit, great. Otherwise, now Caroline Cook, Water Policy Director at Water Now Alliance, will take it away. Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks so much, Shannon. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Caroline. I'm the Policy Director for Water Now. If you'll go to the next slide, perfect. Thank you. So for those, oh, sorry, one back. For those viewers who aren't familiar with Water Now, we are a nonprofit network of local water decision makers, think mayors, city council members, utility executive managers, who are advancing sustainable, affordable, equitable, and climate resilient water solutions in their communities across this one water spectrum that we've been talking about. So now we can go to that next one. Thank you. So sustainable is a term that has many meanings. And I'll note for Water Now, it means providing safe, healthy, and affordable water services for people while preserving the integrity of those water resources and the environment for future generations, which I think will resonate from Kevin's presentation as well. So on the next slide, equity is also a term that can mean different things for different groups. For Water Now, it means universal access to secure, affordable, safe, and healthy drinking water and wastewater and stormwater management services, where equitable water infrastructure investment should support the long-term sustainability of our waterways, water systems, and utilities. So we'll go to the next slide. Thanks. As we hear a lot at Water Now, and as Janet mentioned in her last slide on the final thoughts on benefits there, when it comes to taking a newer approach to water management, like this multiple benefits approach to integrated land use and water planning, most folks don't want to go first. They want to be 10th or even better, 50th. And you may have a similar thought or hear something similar from your networks. And so that's why a big focus of ours at Water Now is compiling examples of communities and building those case studies that Janet mentioned for communities that are already realizing the multiple benefits of these one water investments. So you can see on the map on the slide here, we have a growing case study library of examples across the country. But for today, I'm just going to focus in on 3 of these examples. So first, on the next slide here, we'll zoom in on Severance, Colorado, which may sound familiar to Kevin, where they're working to integrate water use efficiency measures into their comprehensive planning. So we'll get an overview of Severance here on our next slide. Like many communities in Colorado's, one more slide forward, thanks. Many communities in Colorado's Front Range, Severance's population is quickly growing. So this growth and the related development motivated the town to better integrate their land use and water planning. At the same time, Severance's comp plan did include some language on the overall water system, but those references really focus narrowly on the delivery system and interaction with their area water district. So to assist with this deeper integration, Water Now and Western Resource Advocates through our Project Accelerator program partnered with Severance to incorporate water conservation tactics and strategies into their comprehensive plan. So if we'll go to the next slide. As a result of this work, in January 2021, Severance adopted an update to their comp plan that incorporates water and water conservation strategies throughout the plan. For example, the guiding principles and planning influences sections include these strategies, as well as there's a separate water system implementation section that includes specific opportunities for improving water efficiency into the near and longer term. So some of those water saving strategies rather, that the plan identifies include efficient landscaping regulations and coordinating with that neighboring water district to create conservation-oriented system development charges. And again, overall, Severance's goal with the plan were to recognize that water and land use decision-making need to be integrated as a first step, and then to highlight the steps and strategies available to meet that integrated need and planning need into the future. So there's more information on Severance's project through Water Now's case study map, and the link is on the slide. But for now, we'll go to our next slide here. Severance really is not alone in their efforts to integrate land use and water management planning, as we've heard from Kevin. We've also interviewed in a recent survey 24 Colorado communities and learned that integrated, again, or this multiple benefit planning really is their top priority or a top priority. The survey also identified that while many communities are engaged in this integrated planning, there are, of course, some constraints. So what we heard really is a staff capacity issue, as well as agency silos within, as well as across communities, were cited as, major barriers. Folks did, however, also identify updates to outdated land use codes and ordinances as a way to spur more integrated planning. So if you want to read more about those findings from that survey, you can check out our report that you can see if you would go to the next slide here, called The State of Water and Land Use Planning Integration. And again, that's on through the Severance case study. So as another example, we'll go to our next slide here. We'll pan over to California and Los Angeles One Water Plan that integrates water, wastewater, and stormwater management to achieve multiple benefits that we've been talking about. So on the next slide, we can see an overview of LA's One Water Plan, which was developed by two agencies, LA SAN and the LA Department of Water and Power, really to be a roadmap for coordinating long-term water solutions to mitigate local flooding, improve water quality, and create local sources of water supplies. And green infrastructure investments that Janet was talking about on both public and private property are among the strategies LA has identified for meeting those multiple goals. So on the next slide here, we can see what some of those goals are and a few lessons learned. So the plan lays out some specific targets for this One Water approach over the next 5, 10 to 15 years. So for example, the city is aiming to reduce water import purchases by 50%, to draw 50% of their water supply from local sources, to get under 100 GPCD, and to capture 150,000 acre feet of stormwater a year. So similar to what we heard from Colorado, to get to this integrated plan, LA really focused in on breaking down agency silos. They also conducted a robust stakeholder engagement process involving over 500 stakeholders across 15 workshops and another 15 or so special topic discussions. And they've also identified the need to take a portfolio approach to funding and financing. And again, you can find out more information about LA's One Water Plan through that case study map. Speaking of the map, we'll go to our next slide for our last example here for today, which is Madison, Wisconsin's lead service line replacement program. So we'll get an overview of Madison here on the next slide, which may be a less typical example of a multiple benefits integrated planning approach, but Madison's program to replace all of their publicly and privately owned service lines really is a good One Water example, I think. So on the next slide here, walk through how that works. So to replace all lead service line in their community, Madison took a two-pronged approach. First, the city mandated that all lead lines be replaced. Then the water utility offered partial reimbursements to help customers pay for their private replacements. So some of the multiple benefits here is not only did this help reduce residents' exposure to lead and improve drinking water quality, but by also not using a treatment approach, the city realized reduced treatment costs and avoided impacts of that chemical treatment on their downstream neighbors. And certainly this was not a simple task. They had to coordinate with EPA and conduct significant outreach and education. So just to wrap up quickly here, I'll just say, if you can go to that next join us slide. If you're not already, we invite local utility and city leaders on today's program to join Water Now. It's free to join, and membership provides access to additional resources and other benefits. So that's it from me. Thanks so much for the invitation and opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Caroline. And we'll have our other presenters join us now. And if you have to jump off but have a question to ask, please go ahead and make sure you put that in the chat and we'll follow up with that. And otherwise, we can take a few questions now if you're able to stick with us for a couple minutes. And I will let Brad kick off with any questions.
All right. First question I have here from Sarah K is curious why all scenarios all assume an increase in agricultural demands. Isn't there a scenario where we focus on our primary ag lands with more conservation and a focus on climate appropriate crops that could decrease ag supply?
Good question. That's a great question. Yeah, I don't know. I had to look back at that too. And I'm trying to remember why that happened. I know because we're really concerned about acreage being taken out, but the thing is with ag efficiencies though too, if you're using, let's say, drip tape or drip irrigation, the consumptive use could increase if it's not done in a certain way too. So that might be why that is, but I can get back to you on that too. Ag isn't my forte exactly, but I could find out exactly why that happens. And if you can get me your information, I can get back to you on that.
Okay, and I've seen this from a lot of people, so I want to address it. Many people have asked, will the slides be available to those who have attended the webinar?
I can answer that question. Yes, the slides will be available and they will be posted also on the AWE website. If you've registered for the webinar, you will receive an email that confirms that the slides are available and that the recording link is there.
Okay, so another question is, what is the difference between green and blue dots? We had that for one of the.
I think that may be for me. I had green and blue dots on my map, I believe.
Yes, that was the one.
So the blue dots are projects that have been implemented by communities and have been around for a while. Our case studies in our broader Tap into Resilience library. The green dots are those projects that are implemented through Water Now's Project Accelerator program that provides 250 hours of pro bono technical support, which is a program supported by CWCB. So we're very grateful to have that support from that state agency that Kevin was talking about. Thanks, Kevin. But that's the difference in the coding on that map.
All right, thank you. That is the last question I see in the chat. So as a reminder, if anyone has additional questions and we're unable to answer them, we can follow up separately as well.
Great. Thank you everyone for attending our webinar. Hope you learned
Yes.
something new today.
Thank you for joining us today. And if you think of any more questions, please don't hesitate to email them in, and stay tuned for our next webinar, which has not been set yet, but there definitely will be one. Thank you.